Lots of room. He's 40. Like a rocket. Look at Ginty go. Breaks a tackle. He's 20. He's 10. He's touchdown.
Here's a long run. Oklahoma State gonna do it again, and guess who? Big O to the house.
Milroe gonna run it again. Got a lane. Kicked in the turbo. Milroe. Goodbye. Touchdown, Bama.
Pump fake. Cook. End zone. Caught. Touchdown. Luther Burden the third.
All right, Mike, here we are. First podcast of the 2024 season. You know, we've kind of come out of the cave. You've been out in the cave. You've been doing a lot of podcasts yourself, but man, another year, another preseason fantasy draft guide, another year of preseason content. This is sort of that time of the summer where, you know, we're waiting for the player news to break, making slight adjustments here or there, but 4th of July is come and gone. And this is when college fantasy football season starts heating up, man. We've got everything ready to rock and roll. Another year. Here we go. Are you ready, man?
Yeah, let's roll. Let's roll.
So here we go. We're going to do the podcast in a little bit of a different format. I mean, you and I have kind of talked about this. You know, we were used to doing the conference podcast like we did last year, and there was a lot of like requests on, man, I wish we could fast forward to certain parts in the podcast, the videos, because we wanted certain news on certain players. So we decided to do a different format this year. We're going to do it more where it's based on position. I think that's going to lend itself to be a little bit more fantasy draft friendly. So we're going to do a series of pods where we're going to start here with the quarterbacks. We're going to go into running backs, do a pod on them, and then we're going to go and do a pod on receivers, tight ends. You know, the way that we're going to talk about these players is we're going to look at them in tiers. We're going to address some players maybe that we want to target, some that we want to avoid, and maybe who are some of those sleepers or maybe high risk, high reward players, man. So there's a lot to get to. I've got our cheat sheets here in front of us, but you know, we've been doing a lot of these best ball drafts over, you know, throughout the offseason. You've done a lot more than I have. Is there any overarching theme when we're talking about quarterbacks going into drafts this year, or do you find it's just status quo, same as previous years?
I think it depends on the league format, right? If it's going to be, you know, if you're doing a standard redraft, I think you're going to obviously want to target the quarterbacks a little bit earlier, right? You want that security. You want that 25 to 30 and beyond guaranteed every single week. And I think you'll get that with a Kaidon Salter, a Byron Brown, you know, potentially. I think those are the two solidified ones that you're going to get that every single week. And then there's a little bit of drop off for me, you know, with the Dylan Gabriels, but they're still going in the first to second round there. But if you're looking in terms of a best ball, that's where I think you can kind of deviate from maybe going earlier than expected with the quarterbacks, because I really think if you look at the ADP, once you get to like the 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th round, even, I think there's a lot of intriguing options in that area with a lot of high upside too. So I think it depends on the format where you kind of attack the quarterback position. And I would say this too, just to kind of conclude that Kaidon Salter and Byron Brown, I think it's a clear top two. I think their schedules kind of allude to them being like, you know, that upper echelon of quarterback, but I don't know that we have like a Caleb Williams or, you know, a Derek King from years past, or just like that solidified quarterback one, no doubt. I don't know that we have that necessarily this year. So I think it's an interesting year for the quarterback position in college fantasy.
Yeah, and I think that's why this is a nice format for us to do it this way, because instead of addressing players individually by team and conference, we're gonna compare them to one another. Because I agree, you know, for me, I've always said I feel that drafting is not necessarily it's a science. It's not necessarily a science. It's an art. You've got to let the draft, you know, you can't really dictate ahead of time how you want to draft. You have to let the draft dictate how you want to lay out your picks. Of course, you mentioned it depends on the format of your league, could be a 2-quarterback league as well, right? That could really dictate what goes on. But I'm with you. I think there is some top-tier talent. We're going to get into that. But I'm not sure there's that can't miss, have to have type player where you have to have. And look, we came out with our overall top 16, and we have running backs at the top of our list, not quarterbacks this year, where that may have been different in years past. And so let's start right there, because you mentioned Byron Brown and you mentioned Kaidon Salter. For guys that play in P5 leagues, you've got to go maybe 3-4 deep. For you, you've got Dylan Gabriel at 3, Jackson Dart, right? So those are the Power 5 guys, or P4 guys, if you want to call it now. Our lists start with the G5 quarterbacks: Byron Brown, Kaidon Salter. You and I are pretty much lockstep with those two guys as the top 2. There's a little variance in our top 10, but not much. I think it's pretty clear on who the top quarterbacks are this year. And as we get into maybe the second tier, third tier quarterbacks, I think that's where you can see maybe a little bit of difference in rankings. But to your point, if you're drafting, you can almost blank on quarterbacks early and still have some pretty good value there in the middle of the late rounds.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just, because I've been doing these best balls for, months now, and just the amount of intriguing options in that 7 to, 7, 8, 9 rounds where you can get and dual threats too, right? A KJ Jefferson, a Kyron Drones, that mold of quarterback, they're falling to 6, 7, 8, and they've got, arguably as much upside as Byron Brown and Kaidon Salter. I think, and I would say this too, like you talked about it right at the top. There's just, we've had in years past, just a can't miss kind of prospect, right? A Caleb Williams, just for example, right? Like there's question marks right at the top. Byron Brown, you have a somewhat tough schedule, especially right out of the gate with Bama in week 2, and then in Miami in week 4. So, the schedule, there's some question marks there. Kaidon Salter, not the case with the schedule. That is cupcake. But who can you tell me Liberty's wide receiver 1? Right? I mean, you have guesses, but who knows at this point, right? So, this is the kind of year where I think if you maybe want to punt the position a little bit to 6, 7, 8, I think this is the year to do so.
So look here, let's start off with this. Let's start off at the top. Why Byron Brown 1 then? Why do we like him at 1? Why do we like him over Kaidon Salter? There could be some thought on whether or not we want to flip a coin. You just mentioned 2 things about both of them. For you, and I'll go ahead and give my thoughts after as well. Byron Brown 1, Kaidon Salter 2. Why 1 Byron Brown?
I think, well, 2 reasons then. I kind of touched on Liberty's wide receiver room, and maybe somebody emerges, right? But you have Sean Atkins there. You have a proven wide receiver 1 for Byron Brown to go to. So you have a solidified wide receiver 1 option to throw to in that wide receiver room. I think 2, I think it's system, right? It's a system. It's kind of that, the coaching staff, the coach is now escaping me, but came from Tennessee and that kind of veer and shoot system. And so you look
Alex
at that.
Golish. Yeah.
There, Alex Golish. And then you got, what did he have? 200 carries last year. He ran the ball definitely more than Kaidon Salter did. So I think those are 2 reasons. You got a system, a wide receiver 1 there. And then just his utilization on the ground is kind of why I like Byron Brown over Kaidon Salter. I think we'd both agree, probably splitting hairs between the 2 quarterbacks, not a lot of separation.
I agree with you. I love that, that USF offense plays fast. They're going to average a lot of plays per game. That just means more touches for Byron Brown. And you mentioned proven weapons, in particular, the return of Sean Atkins, and there's more around him. So I do think when you look at the complete picture, that's why I like Byron Brown. But Kaidon Salter, like you mentioned, the schedule's there. He's going to give you that dual threat as well. And again, you could be splitting hairs. But let's get into some of the other guys in the top 10. Dylan Gabriel, I'll run through your, top 10 after the first 2. Dylan Gabriel, Jackson Dart, Jordan McLeod. You've got Nico Iamaleava, Jackson Arnold, Seth Hennigan, Garrett Green, Jalen Milroe. Anywhere you want to start with any of those guys in the top 10? Anything that really jumps out of you?
Well, I mean, I think I probably, and I don't want to, I think I have Jackson Dart the highest amongst, everybody that's in the CFF realm that ranks players.
Okay.
And I've talked about it on other podcasts. I just love that offense, specifically this season. He finished his QB 16 last year. And he had some, questionable games, some down performances last year, still finished as a top 20 quarterback. You saw that TD regression or TD progression, I guess you could say, in the rushing game. Had one rushing touchdown in 2022 that got up to 8 last season. And I just look at that wide receiver room now. You bring back Trey Harris, you bring back Jordan Watkins, you have Caden Prescorn at tight end. Then you had Antwain Wells as a complementary piece opposite Trey Harris.
Yep.
I kind of made this comparison earlier in the offseason. I can see, and I'm probably repeating myself for some of our listeners, but I see a little bit of LSU from last year within this Ole Miss team. You're no question marks at wide receiver. You got a veteran quarterback who's looking to prove himself, and you have a team that is positioning themselves, via the NIL market to be one of the, top 12 in the college football playoff. And so they're going to be, balls to the wall, for lack of a better term, each week trying to get into that top 12. So I am very high on Jackson Dart and that Ole Miss offense this year.
So is there any other play? Like, here's the thing, when you're talking these top 10 quarterbacks, very rarely in a draft are you going to have a shot, unless maybe you're at the end of the first round here and considering the weight of other positions. I'm not sure if you're really targeting more than one of these guys, or if more than one are going to be available a couple of rounds into the draft. Is there anybody maybe outside of Jackson Dart that you would target within your top 10, or that you found yourself targeting in some of the drafts you've done?
Yeah, I mean, Nico for Tennessee, I mean, that is just one of the tried and true systems, obviously, under Josh Heupel. I mean, Joe Milton finished his QB 23-ish, around that, and he was terrible last year, at least throwing the football, right? You're going to get 100 rushing attempts out of the QB1 under Josh Heupel. They bring back basically everybody out of the receiving core. So I think that's just, I mean, I could pull up the stats here. I mean, their quarterbacks finished under Heupel like top 30 each of the last 5-6 seasons. I mean, it's one of the tried and true systems in college football. So if I was targeting somebody, that would be that. I think Seth Hennigan, I might be a little higher on him than others, but I would say put it kind of in the Ole Miss realm.
Yep.
You got a G5 team, probably, outside shot maybe with the expanded playoff of getting into that, into that top 12. Bring back most of your playmakers on offense. Seth Hennigan was one of the most consistent fantasy quarterbacks in the country last year. I believe it was like 10 out of 12, maybe even, I probably have it somewhere. He scored 20 or more fantasy points in nearly every single game last year. So especially with redraft, you are getting consistency there and maybe some potential upside this year.
Yeah, I can't, no argument here on that. I do like Seth Hennigan this year. I mean, I've got him at 13, so he's outside of my top 10. So for the sake of where we're living at right now, that's one of the players that we're a little different on. But again, when we're talking like the difference between where you have him and where I have him, sometimes you're splitting hairs, and just depends on where you're falling in the draft. For me, the one guy that I seem to be targeting in the drafts that I have, and where I'm drafting in particular, and where my picks fall and the format, was the guy that I probably had question marks about a couple of months ago, but it's Jalen Milroe at Alabama.
And all of last year.
What's that?
And all of last year.
And all of last year. I mean, look, I was not sold on Jalen Milroe, but he seemed to have a decent spring. That Kalen DeBoard system, again, another system. I was having concerns on whether or not he would operate that. I think for me, that's a player that I've been targeting because I just love his upside. The potential of that passing offense, combined with the ability of him to kind of use his legs, for me, really makes him sort of a sneaky option when you look at, we've got guys like Dylan Gabriel there and Byron Brown. Jalen Milroe for me is one of those guys that have a chance because of his skill set to really kind of match anything that a top 10 quarterback that we have on our list can do, right? With that being said, the other guy that I think I've targeted a little bit too, and I like Jordan McLeod. I like him at Texas State. Again, another system, right? And, given what he did at JMU last year, we talk about weapons coming back. I mean, what Texas State has all three, I think three of their top receivers coming back. I mean, really almost everybody's coming back except the quarterback. And you and I could probably make a case that they probably upgraded from TJ Findley with Jordan McLeod. I think that's another offense. That's another system where I really, really like Jordan McLeod as well. So if I'm outside of the top two picks, those are the two guys that I think I'm looking at inside of my top 10 where I've actually targeted. Are there any guys really in that range, 1 to 10, that you have that you've seemed to avoid for some reason? Or is there any questions that you have with one or two of those guys that you like where they rank? We feel like we have them in a really good spot, but there's just like that something inside of you that's just a little bit of a turnoff.
Dylan Gabriel. I think just
Yes.
probably where I'm located in the country maybe alludes to that. Being in Big Ten country, but you just and Oregon, I think, is a legitimate, top 10 college football playoff contender, maybe national championship contender. But just you get into the months of late October and November up here, and it's cold, and he's from Hawaii. Like, he hasn't had to play in this type of weather, and maybe not. I take that back. It does get cold, in those winter months in Oregon. But just look at their schedule. You get Ohio State in week 7, at Michigan in week 10. And then 2 weeks later, you go at Wisconsin, and then close with Washington, whatever. But then you look week 13, that's the semifinals of your CFF league, bye week. Like, there's reasons that I can see a path to where Dylan Gabriel does not finish as a top 10 quarterback. And I think that has a lot to do with the schedule. I mean, this is a guy that was born in Hawaii. I'm sorry, going up to Ann Arbor in November when there might be snow flurries against a top 3 defense, like, you are debating sitting Dylan Gabriel, and that's not what you want out of a first round quarterback.
So completely agree. You and I have gone, and we've spoken about this before. It's just the fact that Oregon's moving inside into the Big Ten. And it's not that they can't put up the points, and it's not that they won't put up the points, but the consistency of better defenses that they're facing week to week, particularly at the end of the year, like you said, maybe some cold weather months there to end the season, or cold weather weeks, that definitely plays into effect. Because when we were doing the projections, there was just no way we could land at Bo Nix type numbers. Because if it was Bo Nix type numbers that we were projecting, he'd be almost at the top of the list. And for those reasons, that's where he's so that's why I think you and I both have a little bit of hesitancy on Dylan Gabriel. But for me, look, I still got Gabriel ahead of Jalen Milroe. I still feel that because what some folks don't realize in rankings too, there's also that sense of security that you have in there. And you do have a good system up in Oregon, and you do have a good proven quarterback in Dylan Gabriel. When you kind of mesh those two things together, that's why I do have him ahead of Milroe in my rankings. But to your point, a little bit of hesitation just for the point that you made.
Yeah. Do you have any other top 10, top 12 quarterbacks that you're just like, I like them, but I can just let them?
I did like Haynes King a lot more at the beginning of spring than I did at the end. I do think the 3 bye weeks for me is a little bit of a turnoff, especially over at 10 and 12. You won't have him at the end of the year. And that's something that we're going to get into. You and I spoke about that. And that is, it's a little different this year. Fantasy owners are going to have to plan accordingly, or plan differently, have a different strategy this year. Every team has at least 2 byes this week, whereas in the past few years, it's been 1 bye week for most teams. This year, everybody's got 2 byes. But when I look at the top 10, if I'm going to say one more name, and I'm guessing you're itching for another one, I do want to make one comment about Jackson Arnold, because this is another school going into a new conference. Quite honestly, I have Dylan Gabriel ranked over Jackson Arnold, and I'm comfortable with that. But I actually think Jackson Arnold may actually have a lot more success, consistent success in moving into the SEC than maybe Dylan Gabriel might have in the Big Ten. That would be my take, maybe for another player inside of my top 10. What about you?
Oh, that's interesting. I didn't think about that. I kind of, I kind of like that. You mentioned the point about security though, and I like you trust. While I can see that upside, especially with the schedule for Jackson Arnold versus a Dylan Gabriel, there's a sense of security with what is he, a 6-year senior at this point that's proven it, multiple years with Dylan Gabriel over a Jackson Arnold. So, but that's kind of hot takey. I like that one.
I mean, it's just, when you think about the SEC and the Big Ten now, I think the Big Ten is still where maybe the SEC was years ago, where there's still some real good defense, teams that slow it down and can really kind of late in the season, you mentioned those offenses can really turn it down a notch and really shorten the game. The SEC's kind of evolved. I'm not saying there's bad defenses in the SEC, but let's be honest. I mean, Alabama's going to try to outscore people this year, right? Tennessee's going to try to outscore people. LSU's going to try to outscore people. Outside of Georgia, give me another shutdown defense in the SEC, right? I mean, Ole Miss and Alabama, they're still going to be good. They're still going to be good fantasy options, but they're going to try to outscore you. Whereas, you get stuck against a Penn State in late November, you get against Iowa, you play on the road at Ohio State or Michigan. I just think on a week-to-week basis, Jackson Arnold could be a little bit more of a consistent play than Dylan Gabriel. That's my take.
I like it.
Yep. Anybody in there in the top 10 that you want to top 10, 12 you want to look at, or you want to move into the next set? Because here's the deal. You got Kyron Drones up to 11. He's made a jump a little bit in your rankings. There's some other players in that 10 to 20 range, and I think this is where we're going to really get into some really good conversations about different players here. Who is it in that 10 to 20 range that you like, you're targeting, and maybe who's some players that you're avoiding? We'll start with targeting first. That way we go back and forth. So anybody in that 10 to 20 range, Mike, that you seem to be targeting, where maybe you're not getting that top tier guy, but maybe you're getting someone of value in that 10 to 20 range that you like?
Yeah, I think KJ Jefferson really brings security, that you said, and especially with, I'd probably like him more in redraft purposes versus best ball. I know you got some high, 40-point fantasy games from John Rice Plumlee a year ago, but I really like the consistency that he's probably going to bring there. Most of that UCF offense comes back. I think KJ Jefferson is absolutely perfect fit for that UCF offense under Gus Malzahn. For a fact that he is going to run it 100 plus times. Like, just book it. He's going to have 100 carries in the regular season. That's exactly what you want out of a fantasy quarterback. I think the options are really solid, right? Kobe Hudson is back. Townsend is back. I forget his first name now. That's escaping me, but like, they added a couple pieces there in the transfer portal. Jacoby Jones from Ohio could provide a deep threat. Pretty good tight end, Randy Pittman. I think the concern with him would be obviously the backfield there. I think a lot of the carries, right, at any point in the field are going to go to RJ Harvey and Penny Boone there too, with the added depth. But I think from a consistency standpoint, if you can tell me that my quarterback is going to get 100, 120 carries guaranteed this season, I will take that every single time, and that's what KJ Jefferson's going to get.
Yep. I like that. I got KJ Jefferson at number 9, so he's inside of my top 10. For me, and I think this is where, you mentioned a player that you seem to be higher on than others. There's one that I know I've mentioned to you before, and I'll throw it out right here. For me, I've got Riley Leonard at 10 at Notre Dame. I think him not participating in spring, has kind of caused him to not get any type of fanfare. But you've got Denbrock, who left LSU to go to Notre Dame. The offensive coordinator's there. The skill set's there. I really think Riley Leonard, if he stays healthy, can, and given Notre Dame's schedule too, I think that really he has a chance to be a really good fantasy option in 2024. And, I've got another one in there because I think we could spend some time in this top 20 here. I think another one right now that I remember I grabbed in one of the best balls we did, Riley Leonard and Will Howard in back-to-back rounds. And I think Will Howard right now, maybe in that Ohio State offense, could be, getting slept on a little bit. And I say that because Chip Kelly's the offensive coordinator now. And you and I mentioned this, and it's interesting. I think Chip Kelly's a one-and-done offensive coordinator this year. I think he's coming in. It's championship or bust. And if Ohio State wins the Natty, he's out. And if Ohio State loses the Natty, I still think he's out.
Who's out? Who's out? Chip Kelly?
Chip Kelly. I think he's moving on after this year, no matter what. And there's going to be reasons that we're going to get into that because, we're going to get and talk Ohio State receivers on another podcast. But, I think Will Howard is one of those players, too, where I really like. And if, I'm looking at my players in the top 11 to 20, I've got Nico at 11, Riley Leonard at 12, Seth Hennigan, 13, man. Got some great value there. Cam Ward at 14. Joey Aguilar, App State at 15, like Will Howard, 17. Man, there's some good names to our point earlier. You can really punt on quarterback in the first couple of rounds and still get tremendous value in rounds 3, 4, 5, 6 at quarterbacks. Where do you want to start kind of between 11 and 20 on your list? Because you've got some of those same names up in there.
Well, I just want to clarify one point before we move on. You one and done. Chip Kelly will be one and done as offensive coordinator for Ohio State.
Yeah.
Not necessarily at Ohio State. When Ryan Day craps the bed again, Chip Kelly will be the head coach at Ohio State in 2025.
I don't think there's a shot. I think Chip Kelly's a one and done offensive coordinator. That's my call on this year.
There you go. There, yeah. So
the quarterbacks there, the dual backs there that Kelly likes. They can't afford to lose all of those star receivers. And we know in this system, there's going to be one fantasy relevant receiver, and I'll be shocked if there's more than one. That's just Chip Kelly's system. And I don't think they want to lose the talented passing quarterbacks. I don't think they want to lose the talent at receiver. And I think this is a one-year deal.
Okay. I will. I'll take Chandler Morris here as another intriguing quarterback that, I think there's a little skepticism because he wasn't on campus in the spring, and I believe he was finishing out classes back at TCU. But this is, I hate just saying the word system all the time, but this is another one of those tried and true systems under Eric Morris. Look what he turned Chandler Rogers into last year, top 20 fantasy quarterback. He was scoring 30 points a game routinely last year. And I don't even know if he's that good of a quarterback. He's not going to win the starting job at California, right?
Yep.
Now you get
might not.
You might not. Now you get Chandler Morris here, a P5 transfer, a true dual threat too. This is again, it's a system where the quarterbacks have just averaged 30 points a game routinely, fantasy points per game. And not necessarily dual threats like Chandler Morris is. So he's one. I think there's some bust potential, right? You saw him at TCU. I think you remember this too. I remember we were texting back and forth during that opener against Colorado, right? And it was just he just there was something off. If he was hesitant, he was missing throws. Just something was off there. So maybe he's just not a very good quarterback, but you drop down a level. He's got running ability. I think there's QB. I would say there is QB1 overall in college fantasy potential with Chandler Morris, but there's the obvious, a lower floor than some of the quarterbacks in that range too.
So here's what we've spoken about. And I think this is a good point to bring up. If we knew right now, Chandler Morris locked in QB1, no fear of him losing the job, how does that affect his ranking? Because that puts him in the top 10. Easy, right?
I
think it put like
yes
you
and
tell
no.
me that this guy's he's going to hold down that starting job. He's lock solid QB1. Eric Morris system, like you mentioned, for me, he's probably in the top 10.
I don't think there's any danger of him losing the job like there was at TCU, right? I don't think there's a guy behind him that can push him for him to lose the job. I'm more saying that like if he plays up to, whatever, the P5 level 4-star status that he was coming out of high school, if he meets those expectations, that's QB1 potential. But I feel like you kind of have evidence now that he's lost the job essentially a couple of years in a row now, injuries aside. But I think there's a lower floor with him too. So,
sure, more of one of those high risk, high reward players.
Correct.
Right?
Exactly. That's a better way of putting it.
Yeah. And I think, look, there's probably somebody, let's see, where's he fall? Somebody right outside of your top 20 that falls right inside mine that we could probably say the opposite thing about. Thomas Castellano over at Boston College. The thing that probably keeps him out of the top 15, again, change in coaching, maybe a change in system. And there's, that change really for me kind of gives me a little bit concern for Thomas Castellano in 2024. What are your thoughts on him? Because I know that that's a player this year that I think many people would probably thought we would have had ranked higher based on his 2023 season.
Finished as QB 15 last year. He finished as QB 15 and he had 215 carries and 13 rushing touchdowns, right? Now you have the change in offensive coordinator, essentially head coach, offensive coordinator. It's going to be Bill O'Brien calling plays, basically. We don't have a lengthy track record of him wanting to incorporate his quarterbacks in the ground game like that. And you saw the limitations as a passer, right? He was 50-something% completion rating, 15 to 14 touchdown to interception ratio. I think he's kind of like Chandler Morris. You alluded to that, right? There is definite top 5, top 10 potential if he gets that kind of rushing workload again. And there's just not a track record that he's necessarily going to get that. And you know what? He's very slight of frame, right? And I think he got dinged up at multiple points last year too. So high upside, high risk. Just not a guy that I've kind of been targeting there because I think there's such a low floor with the change in play caller and kind of his limitations as a passer.
I think a couple of players to touch on too before we move outside of the top 20 might be the two that there's a little bit of a difference between rankings. I mean, you and I are pretty lockstep with Cam Ward, but you do have Kyron Drones at 11, and you do have Avery Johnson at 13. Want to touch on those guys real quick?
Obviously both dual threats. I mean, they're two of the most athletic quarterbacks in the country that we have. I think, Kyron Drones has some limitations as a passer where we don't really even know what Avery Johnson is at a passer at this level. He was not very impressive in at least throwing the ball right in the bowl game versus NC State. For Avery Johnson, for me, it's the system, right? You are, again, kind of like KJ Jefferson, which I spoke on earlier. You're essentially locked into 100 carries, if potentially 150 carries if he doesn't get injured at some point, which Kansas State quarterbacks actually have been prone to over, the last couple seasons. So I think a lot of a high upside with Avery Johnson and a proven system there. With Drones, I love they have the most returning production in the country, one or two. Just that entire offense is coming back, and he was scoring 30 points a game over the last 3 to 4 weeks. So you're bringing essentially everybody back on offense. I think there's only room to go up there. And I'll say this too, with regards to Drones, he had 100. Let's see. Let me just pull this up real quick.
I'll say this while you pull it up, and I'll make this point. I do like Avery Johnson more than Drones, and here's my point on this. Remember last year, we didn't know what to expect from this Virginia Tech offense. We were like, hey, what are we going to get? And then, what we thought we were going to get, we got for the first half of the season. And then all of a sudden, Virginia Tech was a different team during the second half of the year. That does make me favor Avery Johnson a little bit because of the consistency in the system. And I do think, to your point, Virginia Tech returns a lot of talent, but I'm a little hesitant on whether or not Drones can duplicate that because we just don't have the tried and true history with the system. We'll see. But that's why I prefer Avery Jones over Drones. But I'm gonna let you finish your point on Drones here and what you like.
Yeah, he had 5 rushing touchdowns, but 166 carries. Like if he's getting 166 carries, I know he's like 220 plus pounds. He's getting more than 5 rushing touchdowns. So I think there is definitely another level that he can reach to where he becomes a potential top 15, top 10 quarterback.
Yep. So as we move out of the top 20, this is where things get interesting because you and I talk about this all the time, right? Unless you're getting those top tier guys, you can sit a little bit. And then in some of the best ball drafts that we do, you can go for some of those skill position players, rounds 2, rounds 3, rounds 4. It's really rounds 4 or 5 where some of those second tier players come off. And then it feels like, man, you can go 7, 8, 10 rounds and all of a sudden find very similar value between quarterback 25 and maybe sometimes quarterback 45. So let's kind of live in that 20 to 45 range right now and just kind of take on a few names with a few players that we want to look at. Do you want to start anywhere? Because, there's a lot of names to get to. Let's just talk about players that maybe you're targeting or would recommend targeting in that somewhere in that range. And it could be 2, 3, 4, 5 names.
Yeah, I'll start. Like Brady Cook, I think is one that you can get. Let's see. Let me just pull up ADP here. Brady Cook is probably going around the 12th round, I would say, in most of my best balls at this point. He's going off the board as QB 24, according to ADP. And for me, there is a consistency of the kind of quarterbacks that I'm targeting. If you would notice, like I mentioned, I'm really high on Seth Hennigan. I'm really high on Jackson Dart. Brady Cook kind of fits that mold. I really like veteran quarterbacks going into their senior years, something to prove. And you look at those 3 quarterbacks, Ole Miss, Memphis, Missouri, they're bringing back almost their entire wide receiving rooms, right? So there's a lot of consistency, a lot of familiarity with where they're throwing the football. And they're not Byron Brown, but Dart, Hennigan, and Cook will all give you something on the ground too. So I think Cook, there's a lot of potential for him to kind of get into that top 20 range or like finish in the top 20, because I love what they're bringing back. I mean, he's got a top 2 receiver, right, in the country to throw to, and then some of their secondary pieces in the receiving game. So he's kind of one that where you can wait till round 12 and get a guy for a team that is just bringing back essentially everybody. And I think will at least match what they did last year offensively.
Yeah. A name that's interesting for me that I don't have any shares of this year, but it's an interesting pick for me, and it's because of the system, is the Grayson McCall move over to NC State. You have McCall a few spots higher than me, inside your top 20 at 18. He's at 24, a veteran guy, another proven system, proven dual threat system. Could really, really make some noise this year, I think, at NC State. Proven receiver back in KC Concepcion, right? I think he's got some average pieces around him. But that's a name that I like that I don't have any shares of right now that's in my top 25 that I do like this year. I think maybe you have a few shares of Grayson McCall. Do you?
Oh, yeah.
You have shares of everybody.
I've done 30 drafts at this point. I keep repeating myself, but I mean, Robert and I just is that system, right? Brennan Armstrong was terrible last year and he finished as a top, 30, he was averaging 25 fantasy points per game, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's just kind of the nature of this offense. I don't know how much Grayson McCall is actually going to run at this point, which could kind of limit his ceiling. But what you kind of alluded to is that, you bring back KC Concepcion, Justin Jolly could end up as a top 5 tight end. He's that athletic. He had 80 targets last year for Connecticut. And then they just improved that receiving room. You brought over Noah Rogers, Ohio State transfer, Wesley Grimes from Wake Forest. So you have an improved receiving room, improved tight end room, experienced quarterback under one of the best offensive minds in college football. So yeah, that's absolutely
well, I mean, look, I have no there's nothing inside of me that believes that Grayson McCall is going to run for 600-700 yards, but there is the potential for him to score 6 to 8 rushing touchdowns in that offense. And so that can make up for where the lack of yards actually comes in. One for me, I have Brady Cook at 39. So you and I are a little different on Cook. I think for me, I'm more interested to see what happens with that backfield. Obviously they brought in 2 proven backs there, but I could see that. Look, you've got what we have, my number one receiver, and your number 2 receiver, Luther Burden, right? So he's got one of the best wide receivers in the country. So we know just by association of having one of the top receivers in the country, this guy's going to put up some passing yards. He's going to put up some passing touchdowns. So to your point, I think that really builds a case because most of the really good quarterbacks in here, we mentioned even with Byron Brown, the tiebreaker between him and Caden Salton, proven receiver back, right? So there's some value right there. But there is one name that I have next to Brady Cook for me that is I wouldn't say this is a guy that I'm targeting early at all, but for me is a little guy that hangs around a little bit, and I have him as one of my sleepers, and I'm trying to see where you have this guy rated. Maybe he's up on your list now, but I think Brendan Sorsby at Cincinnati is a little bit of a sleeper for me that I seem to be targeting in later rounds when he's hanging around. Cincinnati, an offense that brings back, I think, their entire offensive line, underperformed last year. You've got Corey Kiner back, 1,000-yard back, which was kind of surprising when you think of Corey Kiner last year. You don't really think of him as a 1,000-yard rusher. You've got Xavier Henderson back at wide receiver. I think they added a couple of pieces as well. I think Cincinnati is going to be really improved this year. I'm not expecting them to be an offensive juggernaut, but we only need fantasy production. We don't need wins out of Cincinnati. And that's a guy that I've kind of been targeting in the late rounds in some of these drafts when he's still hanging around us, maybe like picking him up as quarterback 3, quarterback 4. Any guy in that list, in that zone area for you in that list?
Well, I like the Brendan Sorsby call because if you just look back at Scott Satterfield's quarterbacks, I think at least 9 of the last 10, if not all 10, have rushed for at least 400 yards in a season over the last decade. So he's not Emory Jones as a runner, and thank God he's not Emory Jones as a passer, right? He's an improved passer over Emory Jones, but like I've said this multiple times now, but you're telling me that I'm guaranteed 400 yards and probably 100 carries out of my quarterback, which you are able to get closer to around 16, 17, 18.
Yeah.
You're going to take that all the time. Plus the experience that they bring back, Cincinnati does on offense. So someone in that range. Devin Dampier, I think, is kind of a guy that I've just, planted my flag on. He was really impressive kind of late last year, stepping into that QB1 role. He's a dynamic athlete. All the spring reports were positive with him. And then in the mold of kind of Robert and I, who came up under that Bronco Mendenhall offensive system, right? And you just look back over the years at Virginia and previous to that at BYU, you put a dual threat under Bronco Mendenhall, he's going to get 100, 120 carries. He's going to give you a really high floor because of his rushing upside. Turnover in the coaching staff, turnover on some of the pieces on offense. So he's not a guy that you're going to reach for or anything like that, but he falls to around 20. Might as well take a shot as your QB4, QB5 type. So you want those dual threat quarterbacks, right? That's what you want in college fantasy.
Yeah. Well, look, there's going to be a little bit more we're going to get to because there's a few or at least a handful of high risk, high reward names in this area. But one thing that really jumps out at me now while we're going through this list and I'm looking at the name, we've gone this long into this show and we haven't mentioned a USC quarterback yet. Miller Moss. Let's go there. I'll give you the floor first because this is somebody we've spent a lot of time discussing.
You should watch the CFF All Access podcast 2 weeks ago because Eric Croton, he was like, he reminds me of I've never watched it, but one of the Beavis and Butthead guys, and he just the way his head's shaped and his haircut and everything like that. You should watch that clip. But yeah, I mean, Eric, he made some salient points because he's obviously located on the West Coast. He's seen him up close, and while he was impressive in that bowl game against Louisville, that was against backups, right? That was against scrubs. So, taking that into account, he was not impressive through 3 interceptions, I believe, in the spring game. So he is a guy, obviously, especially in 6-point passing leagues, there is top 5 upside, right? Assuming he keeps the job for the entirety of the season, there is top 5 upside because that's what Lincoln Riley has produced over the last decade with college fantasy quarterbacks. But there's the question of if he keeps that job for the entirety of the season. And I think people are starting to kind of take notice that, I think I saw you were the first one to, at least that I've seen in a draft, to take Jaden Mayava, the UNLV transfer, as a handcuff.
I did.
And I've started to see that even more consistently now in drafts.
Well, here's the thing. In our best ball draft that we did last month, I got Miller Moss in round 15. Now, if you're going to give me a USC quarterback under Lincoln Riley in round 15, I'll go ahead and invest 2 roster spots in a quarterback, and I'll handcuff him there. Because at that point, for me, that's more of a value pick. But that's why I want to discuss. I've got him in round 15 of a 12-team draft. And here's my prediction. We discussed this. I've watched the tape on Miller Moss too. I'm not convinced he's it. I don't think he's going to be the starter by the end of the year. But I do think, but I could be wrong. And if I'm wrong, I've got a tremendous value at that spot in round 15. But I did handcuff him. But yeah, man, it's just unusual. He just, in my opinion, doesn't look the part. I hope I'm wrong. But man, to make it through this far of a show and when was the last time? I don't ever think that we've ever been this down on a Lincoln Riley quarterback. I can't remember the last time. Not even at ECU when Lincoln Riley was there were we down on a quarterback like this.
Let's see. No. Caleb Williams, Spencer people like questions about Spencer Rattler. I guess
you have to go back to the kid that had the freshman that transferred to BYU that was didn't do well his second year. Who was that? He set the freshman record for completion percentage.
Yeah.
No, that wasn't. I'm sorry.
No.
That wasn't even when that was not under Lincoln Riley.
No. Yeah,
that's right.
So you got Caleb
Williams,
go to
Spencer
Oklahoma.
Rattler. Yeah.
Yep. Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Shane Carden. If you go back to 2014 for Lincoln Riley,
yes,
and forever, right?
Yeah. This is the lowest I think we've ever been on a Lincoln Riley quarterback.
Yep. And that's why you take the shots too. There has been one quarterback that has finished outside the top 12 under Lincoln Riley in the last decade. That's why you take a shot on Miller Moss, even if you could get burnt, but that's why you handcuff with Jaden Mayava.
Yeah. So, let's talk about maybe, sticking with that theme, maybe the high risk, high reward player. There's a few of them in this list. I mean, let's start with, where do we go? Maybe John Mateer, Washington State, right? Like Washington State, you take them. I mean, look, they're playing a Mountain West schedule this year. The defenses aren't that great in the Mountain. Even San Diego State has gone to that air raid attack, right? And so, is that a guy? Because I mentioned this with Chandler Morris, that if he was locked in at quarterback 1 at Washington State, which he hasn't officially locked that job down, but if he was, would he be higher on our list or your list?
I mean, yeah, obviously.
He's 32 for you. And I think if you told me today he's the starting quarterback week 1, opening up Washington State schedule, for me, he's at 25. For me, he's probably in my top 20.
Yeah, we just limited sample size. We don't know if he's any good, right? He was locked in a battle with Zevi Eckhouse throughout the spring. Yep. I kind of said it last night on another podcast that I would give it a 60-40%, split right now between Mateer winning the job versus Eckhouse. I think primarily in all of the big scrimmages, it was Mateer getting first team reps with the starters. So clearly the coaching staff favors him. And, speaking to Miller Moss, it's just, you look at quarterbacks under Ben Arbuckle, you are going to get potentially 600 passing attempts in a season, right? That's top one upside as a fantasy quarterback, and Mateer can run. I'm not saying I don't think Mateer is in the realm of a Bailey Zappi, Austin.
No,
Reed,
but he offers dual threat ability,
that type, right? But yes, so it's one of those situations, in my opinion, that you probably, depending on league size, right? It's easier to do in 30 rounds versus 16 rounds in a standard draft, but you'd be wise if you're picking John Mateer to handcuff with Zevi Eckhouse.
Could we say something similar about the situation with Gio Lopez at South Alabama?
I don't think so. Had a very, it's widely known at this point, he had a very poor spring game, didn't complete a pass. No, I Bishop Davenport, Utah State transfers there, but I still think Gio Lopez is the guy there. There is one that I would say that people are drafting highly is Matthew Sluka at UNLV. That is one where you might have a high upside, right? He's going to get you 100 carries. He's a tremendous athlete in a really good offensive system, but wasn't there in the spring. Haj Malik Williams, another transfer, came in and impressed enough to really kind of have a stranglehold on that QB1 job heading into some summer practices. So that's one where I could see people have been drafting Sluka. Maybe that's the wrong quarterback.
Yeah, I'm with you. I look, Sluka's up higher for me. I got him at 29. You have him at 44. I do think he's going to win the job. Again, whoever wins that job, what do they have? One of the best wide receivers in the country to throw to. You've got Ricky White. So you've got a real good playmaker there at receiver. But to your point, he wasn't there in the spring, which in my opinion, that's why Sluka is a value right now. And in your opinion, why Sluka is not value right now. And so this happens every year. There's always this zone of players where maybe you get somebody that, they're not going to show up to summer workouts, that they're not there in the spring. I made a point earlier. That's why I think I'm higher on Riley Leonard right now. If Sluka was there in the spring, would Sluka be the quarterback one? Would we have more signs? Yeah. And chances are, if we knew we had more concrete evidence of what was going to happen, there's chances that you and I would have this guy ranked a little differently right now. So.
Yeah. And, as at this point in the summer, it really behooves a CFF player to just take chances on these quarterback battles, because you know what? We have a guy ranked inside our top 2 at quarterbacks that was in the same situation as a Matthew Sluka last year and Byron Brown, right? Remember Gary Bohannon?
Yep.
Locked in a battle. Byron Brown was falling to double-digit rounds because everybody was tentative about drafting that situation. Well, you know what? He's a top 5 quarterback, right? So you be wise and handcuff yourself with the secondary option. But if you're in a redraft league, you just cut them and you got a potential top 10 quarterback.
So here's what we'll do. I think, we're gonna discuss a couple of names here or there. Let's be honest. Once when you get outside the top 50, you're really only selecting these guys in real deep drafts. So this is what I want to do, Mike. I think this will be fun. Outside of our top 20, I'm going to mention the names that we haven't discussed yet. Quick bullet point on each one of these names. I'll kind of offer a bullet point as well, just to give the listener something to go off and a little bit of substance on each one of these players, right? Number 23, Garrett Nussmeier. Quick point on Garrett Nussmeier.
God, you're from down there. What's his nickname?
Look, weapons all around. Weapons all around him. No proven running back yet in the backfield. I do think LSU is going to be a little bit more physical this year, but all signs are pointing that they're going to throw the ball around more. And they've got the weapons around him. I think Nussmeier is great value. You have him at 23. I have him much lower than that, more around the 40 range. Again, sometimes between this 25 to 40 range, we're splitting hairs. I don't think he offers much as a running quarterback, but if they throw it around as, just 75% of what they did last year, there's going to be good value there.
Yeah, it was it's not the Nuss Bus. There's some like Bayou, some nickname down there. That was going to be my point.
Okay, gotcha.
Can't find it.
I completely missed it. I went off the rails on that one.
Yeah.
Here we go. Jalen Daniels. Quick point on Jalen Daniels. Anything there? Didn't play much of last year.
Yeah, if his back's healthy, he's a top 20 quarterback, or he could, you could re-injure that thing, at a given moment. So high upside, low floor.
Josh Hoover, TCU.
Same thing. He's a gunslinger, just like Nussmeier. High upside, great system,
Good finish.
low floor,
Finish
great finish. He was averaging 30 plus points a game over the final 6 games, but limited sample size.
Quinn Ewers, Texas.
Arch Manning opted into the NCAA 24 football game. Maybe that's a precursor for opting in at some point this season if Quinn Ewers flames out.
Weapons around him, though, no shortage of weapons, right? So all the signs are there for him to at least offer you, and that's what I like about Quinn Ewers. It's at least a decent floor, right? A little bit of security there. One player I didn't mention, I skipped over on purpose because I'm about to blow up, is Shedeur Sanders, Colorado.
Yeah. I look, in all seriousness, 6-point passing touchdowns. I think he's a rock solid top 20 quarterback. But some people have him as a top 10 quarterback. He's not that. He doesn't run, so he's not going to finish in the top 10. So I don't get anybody ranking him in that range.
I'm staying away from Colorado. I told you this, so I may as well just go ahead and get this rant over with. I think that Colorado is not going to be that good this year. I could be completely wrong. And look, I say this, I love Deion Sanders as a player. I did. He was my favorite DB back in the day. Loved watching prime time. But boy, if they don't win games this year, that has potential to turn into a circus. And I don't want any part of Colorado. I really don't. I just have a feeling that if they start out slow, this could get ugly. And I think guys are going to start jumping ship and they're out of there. No Shedeur Sanders for me. Don't want it. See ya.
Week 2, Joe DeSalvo, Nebraska fan. Colorado at Nebraska. Who wins?
I looking back to last year, it was an embarrassing loss. I think Nebraska's going to tighten the screws this year. They're going to have at least an offense. Look, Jeff Sims isn't the quarterback, so I'm hopeful that he's not going to give at least 2 games away. And I think that, that defense through the first half of the game last year against Colorado really did dictate the game. They just didn't have anything offensively. Look, I hope I'm wrong about Deion in Colorado. I like him. I don't want any part of that team if there's a chance to blow up second half. Look what Sanders did last year. He started out really strong, and everybody thought that they had the sleeper of the draft, and he didn't do much over the second half of the season. And I don't want any part of that. I think it could be second half of 2023 all over again in 2024 if they start out slow.
We'll see.
There we go. A couple of more names here inside. Jalen Rayner, Arkansas State.
People, I'm going to say this, and I could be off base here, but people keep mentioning the fact that they brought in Timmy McClain in as a backup. Again, could be completely off base here, but they literally had a freshman. A freshman was the only scholarship quarterback they had behind Jalen Rayner. They had to bring somebody in, right? And it just so happened to be Timmy McClain. There's only so many spots on each college football team. So I think, I kind of question the coaching staff, but I think he proved so much high upside with those multiple 40-point performances last year. So if everything clicks, he could be a really good value where he's going.
Yeah, you and I have him right around the same spot. Noah Fafita, Arizona. Quick thought on him. Obviously, I think I like him better. 6-point touchdown leagues.
Yep, that's it. You hammered it. And then, same thing with Shedeur essentially is that a really good quarterback, but just a non-runner, right? So you just can't overvalue him.
Yeah, Jacob Zeno. You've got him top 35 at 34. Good value there. UAB offense. Again, we'll mention this. We didn't know, we mentioned this about Virginia Tech last year. We didn't know what to expect out of that UAB offense last year, right? Quite a surprise.
Yeah, no roadblocks really on the schedule. I thought Jacob Zeno was, a lost cause at quarterback, and he finished as a top 35 quarterback for UAB. Bring back most of the weapons. Amari Thomas, a really good receiver. So I think there's, he's a really solid option.
Nicholas Vattiato, and Middle Tennessee.
I'm not as high on him as I think some others in the industry appear to be. I just the new coaching staff and everything surrounding there. There's really not a proven option. I think there's some good options, Omari Kelly, but not a real proven option at wide receiver. So I think he's a good, solid option, kind of a la Jacob Zeno, but I wouldn't rank him in a top 30.
I mean, I think I look. I've got Zeno. I've got Vattiato next to players like Vasco, Taylor Green. So I mean, that's sort of like how I kind of see him shaking up. You've got him ranked a little bit higher than me, but like I said, splitting hairs at this point. Tucker Gleason, Toledo. This was an interesting one, Mike, because when Gleason relieved Daquan Finn over the last few years, he was able to put up some numbers in spot duty. I don't know if he'll be able to match anything from a dual threat ability, but Tucker Gleason, where do you have you have him at 37? I've got him at 36.
Yeah,
I think he offers some decent value there, particularly as they get into MAC play.
Yeah, I think you kind of hit on it. Like he's not the athlete that Daquan Finn was. He's not going to run the ball as much, but I think they're going to throw the ball a little bit more Toledo this year with Gleason, and then just kind of bring back most of the weapons at wide receiver. And I think there's some question marks in the running back room where Jarquez Stewart, probably RB1, but at 180 some pounds, like is he going to get that full workload of a Penny Boone? I think that's going to lead to more passing from the Rockets in 2024.
Carson Beck, Georgia, you have him at 38. I've got him inside my top 30.
Yeah, I don't watch Georgia games, so they're very boring. So no opinions on Carson Beck.
I like Carson Beck. Look, if he improves off of last year's numbers, we just talked about liking Shedeur Sanders and Noah and Fafita in 6-point touchdown passes. There's nothing not to like about Carson Beck too. Donovan Smith, Houston. Willie Fritz system.
I don't know about you, but I just don't have the good vibes with that situation. He missed most of the off season to this point. I believe he's cleared to play for fall camp, but just a lot of turnover at receiver. A lot of turnover along the offensive line. The new coaching staff. I don't know. I'm not jumping in, and I think you would agree. Like I like Donovan Smith as a fantasy quarterback, but he's not the. PFF.
You have him ranked a few spots ahead of me. I think if there's one thing that plays into his hand, and there is some health issues. The one thing about working and playing under Willie Fritz, as opposed to where last year and maybe during his time at Texas Tech, he probably has fewer decisions that he has to make now with the ball. That may actually help him out a little bit. Does offer some dual threat ability, but that running back's going to get a lot of work in that offense too. I think we have him ranked at just the right spot. What about DJU at Florida State? Look, Jordan Travis was a top 5-7 quarterback last year.
You're going to get 7 rushing touchdowns out of the QB1 under Mike Norvell. We know that DJU is capable of doing that at his size. Who's he throwing to? Right, and Florida State's got nobody outside of Malik Benson, Malik Benson was a complete bust
as their highest rated fantasy receiver,
and he was an absolute bust last year at Alabama. So I think question marks with the passing game, but he's a good runner inside the red zone, and I think he provides a really high floor for a late quarterback in rounds 19 to 20.
So one last year. Jordan Travis, top 10 quarterback, DJU for us outside the top 40. Okay. Or right around that mark is where I'm looking at. Last year, Western Kentucky quarterback, preseason top 10, TJ Finley, 41 for you. Probably around, he's 32 for me if I'm a little higher. TJ Finley, Western Kentucky.
Change an offensive coordinator. I think they're going to run the ball more under Will Friend, the new offensive coordinator, was a former offensive line coach. So little ambiguity with the kind of the offensive system there. I think it's still, pass heavy, pass happy.
No Malachi Corley this year either.
Right. You got Dalvin Smith, solid option, but he's
Dalvin
fine.
Smith's
right?
been there. I'm with you. But Malachi Corley was, he was a different receiver.
Either way, they're going to run the ball a little bit more. I think you're going to see more balance, probably a 55-45 type split, as opposed to, what was it, 60-40, 65-35 in previous years.
Cade Klubnik, Clemson, you've got him at 43.
Ugh.
I've got him 31, so I do have him a little bit higher. Will he catch on in that system in year number 2 under Garrett?
I think that's the thing. Like, Clemson receivers are going to be better. Like, at this point, I think a lot of people would agree that Cade Klubnik stinks, but we probably said that about Max Duggan before he lit it up a couple of years ago for TCU. So, what do we know?
Yeah. So let's just go a couple more here before we go outside the top 50. Ashton Daniels. You and I do have a difference of opinion on Ashton Daniels. Your thoughts on Ashton Daniels at Stanford?
There is no coach that runs his quarterbacks more than Troy Taylor. And Ashton Daniels is a dual threat. And I think, they bring back top 2 receivers, top tight end. They had a freshman come in that's really impressive at receiver 2. So I think there's a lot of weapons there for him to work with. Again, risky option, but
why is he a risky option? That's the question.
Because Stanford could stink. And
is there any threat? And here's why I don't like it. I don't know yet if Stanford has that proven running back. Cedric Irvin, we have projected at running back 1. Justin Lamson came in last year from Syracuse, and he vultured some of the rushing attempts and touchdowns.
I'll calm some of those concerns. He was QB3 in the spring ball, so.
But that doesn't mean he's not going to run. That's my point. I'm not saying he's not QB3 throwing the football.
Yeah. Well,
my concern is do they have a running quarterback, and do they insert Justin Lamson in those situations? That's my concern.
I think could happen. Could be a bit of overthinking there too. So, but there's some risk involved with Ashton Daniels.
Gotcha. Okay, so look, Mike, as we get outside the top 50, you start throwing darts. And I think there's some names on our list where when we look at this, I'm looking at our lists and. I'm seeing yours in particular. One name that jumps out at me at 56, Baron Morton, Texas Tech.
Fully cleared to be healthy.
I've got him at 44, so that's not particularly high for a Zach Kitley quarterback either. Yeah. Thoughts on Baron Morton?
Fully cleared to be healthy. I think it was announced today at Big 12 Media Day. There was some question. Remember, they threw out that ambiguous like media post, right? That he's going to be shut down for the spring. I think most people agree too that Texas Tech is going to, we know what Zach Kitley wants to do, and he wants to throw this football. It's in his DNA. So I think you're going to see I think you're going to see Taj Brooks get less of a workload. And I think, assuming things go well with Baron Morton's health, I think you're going to see them throw the ball a little bit more.
Yeah, look, I picked, 16-team league, Power 5 only. Picked up Baron Morton in the 8th round as my QB3. I'm happy with that. I kind of like that. The big unknowns when we get to Texas Tech is going to be when we get to receivers, right? That's going to be a little bit more of the roll of the dice. But we know in this offense, there is potential where we may be, there's worth taking some risks on some players like that. Any other names for you outside the top 50 you want to take a stab at? I mean, you've got Taylor Green in there. You got the Braden Fowler, Nicolosi, again, 6-point touchdown leagues. You've got intriguing options like Lenore Sellers at South Carolina, right? Mikey Keene, Fresno, Graham Mertz, who had a big year last year, has potential to have another big year this year, but they've got that top recruit that came in. Anybody outside the top 50 you want to discuss? Maybe your boy Alex Orji over at Michigan, like anybody that you're looking outside of that top 50 spot where maybe this is worth a dart throw.
Yeah, I was just going to close this out with Alex Orji at Michigan. Still in a quarterback battle, quote unquote. I compare him to Jalen, and I think he's garnered this kind of comparison with some of the Michigan faithful, but Jalen Milroe light, right? Lot of work to do as a passer, but he is considerably pound for pound the best athlete on the Michigan roster. And you got him as a quarterback, where you may not start him the next year. So maybe you're not worried as much about health per se and stuff like that. You might run him a ton. So I think there's a lot of upside there with Alex Orji if he wins the starting job. for the entirety of the season. And like I said, he's best athlete on the team. And I think you're getting him beyond round 25. So why not take the dart throw at a QB option like that?
Yeah, and you know what? I'll throw out, a couple of more just to kind of end this. When I look at your list and I look at my list, man, if I'm really going to kind of put some dart throws out there, Mike, I looked at Indiana's schedule. If Curtis Rourke does win that starting job, Indiana could get off to a really fast start. Not saying he's going to have a long-term success, but that could be some really good early season value. You and I talk about this all the time. Sometimes when we rank players, sometimes we have to account for the early season schedule a little bit more than the late season, because if you draft a player with a tough early season schedule and he struggles, and your head-to-head league, you're struggling and you're 1-4, 1-3 after the first 3-4 weeks, you can be like, oh, Micah Joe said this guy was going to be good, and then he explodes in the second half of the season. So, we do take into account sometimes schedule too when we look at rankings. And if he's able to secure that quarterback one job up at Indiana, I think Indiana's schedule really plays out nicely. And then you got Blake Shapen at Mississippi State too, right? And it's all about a system guy. And so I think those two names for me, after I get outside of my top 50, 55, really stand out for me.
Yeah, that Indiana schedule is absolute cake in the non-conference part of the schedule. So, maybe Curtis Rourke looks good for that first month, and you try and trade him after that, because then he gets in the heart of the Big Ten schedule.
There we go. Any closing thoughts here on quarterback, Mike? I think we did a pretty comprehensive cover. We covered the top 50 pretty comprehensively. So, any party shots, any hot takes on this quarterback group before you had it? Like, you have anything that you haven't said so far? Like, man, I've been dying to say this, and now I can finally get it recorded.
I wish I still think, I've said this before, Jackson Dart could finish as QB1 this year. I think he's got that much upside. This Ole Miss offense has that much upside with the surrounding pieces. Not much of a hot take, I guess, for a top 5 quarterback, but I think most people wouldn't consider him as a QB1 potential option at the end of the season.
I like it. I think we'll end with that. Good take. I don't really have anything outside of what I said about Colorado turning into a dumpster fire. So I think that was my hot take. But that's it, man. Look, first show's in. Quarterback's done. Went through, gave everybody a lot of names to really think about. And we're going to bust out a couple of more of these. We're going to hit running backs next. Then we're going to hit receivers, tight ends. And, man, we're going to, once when these hit the website within the next week, we're going to start getting into the heart of draft season. So that's it. So my partner, Mike Bainbridge, my name's Joe DeSalvo. That's going to do it for the first podcast of the 2024 season with the CFF site. Till the next show, we'll see you guys.